It seems to me, though, the rate of change is accelerating in making changes and adaptations to um, standards. In other words, and just to make this question a little longer, set-top box data is beginning to be processed through Donovan. And
Yeah.
that seemed to be fast, particularly since there are no generally agreed upon standards. We're working on standards and definitions. So what would you say about the rate of change?
Yeah. So I want to actually give two answers to that, or two parts of one answer. Disruption in the media ecosystem is accelerating so quickly it's blinding. In my career, which I've told you started in the mid-'70s, the first major disruption was our friend Ted Turner, who started something called the cable network, with the Superstation down in Atlanta, and look what cable networks are today. That was the first major disruption to the regular magazine, newspaper, TV station network that was out there. I would say the next major disruption was local cable, which probably followed about 10 years later. And I don't want to go in. What it meant was we were consuming media, we, you and me and everyone, we were consuming media differently, and getting advertising to those eyeballs had to change, and that was a disruption in systems and processes that had to work. Fast forward, I'm going to blow through the whole digital age, which the changes have been rapidly. It's no longer the 7 to 9 years. It's more like the 1 to 2 years. But my favorite story is the iPad. So at the the IAB annual conference in 2010, the iPad had just been announced. It wasn't out yet. The conference is in February. So fast forward to the IAB conference the next year, and when quite a few speakers asked how many people in the room had an iPad, and I understand we're a special slice of the consumer market, it was about 80% of the people raised their hands and said, how many of you are actually using it right now? And half of those people left their hands up. What an amazing disruptive change, and none of us know where that stuff is going. So disruption, or what you're calling change, is happening at a much faster pace. When we decided to take in the first set-top box data at Donovan, which was the rent track data, we did not have a single request to use that data. Didn't matter. Our whole approach has changed. We have to be slightly ahead of these curves, which will eventually start to become regular business processes, so people can start to dabble, so people can play with some stuff, both in the research systems that we have throughout our broadcast products, but even in the transaction systems themselves. And we are working on some stuff right now to try and allow media that's sold differently from what we're used to work within same or similar business process environments, so that people can dabble. If you have people do something completely different, we think that is actually a roadblock to change in the media systems. And that's no good because, Charlene, we can't, I've mentioned this phrase before, there's an inexorable movement of eyeballs. It was called fragmentation for many, many years, meaning different channels. But now there's also the on-demand eyeballs, where people are watching premium content on demand. And I'm not talking about just DVRs, that was the beginning. But now we have extensive premium content available in VOD, and even more content available online on the internet. How do you bring all those eyeballs together onto one piece of paper? So I got to tell you, it's exciting, but we can't think about it. We can't sit around and wait, okay, let's see how eventually the Hulu business model, I'm going to call it because they're the biggest online provider of on-demand premium content, how does that actually become something? All right, then we'll write a system. We can't wait anymore. So not only is the pace of change different, it's our attitude to the systems we have to write as it's kind of forming. It's completely changed here at Donovan. So exciting.
So Harvey, how do you get all those eyeballs on one piece of paper?
Yeah. I think it's got to start with impressions. I think that is the common currency. People have been talking about this for a while now. We are working with networks, content owners, inventory owners, whatever phrase, some people call them programmers, talking to them about what they think, how they think they'd like to sell this stuff, the how, right? Not how much it's worth, that's between sellers and buyers. We are talking to agencies about some of our thought processes around how you might make impressions fit on the same piece of paper where you have Nielsen ratings. We've gotten really good feedback. There's one quote that I think is very, very important, which is, that makes a lot of sense, and it's the best we have now. And that one little comment from a very senior research guy in an agency made us realize that these systems have to be ready maybe even for multiple models. Maybe different advertisers are going to agree, with their agencies that they want to, I'm going to say, convert into a similar currency, an impression on demand, where you can't skip in one way, but another advertiser is going to look at it completely differently. So wouldn't that be something? Multiple currencies depending on who the advertisers, depending on who the on who the content owner is. I think a lot of people have seen this presentation that our friends at CNBC put together with Rentrak data, and they're looking at, they're into household income. In Nielsen, you have, through the NAD data, one household income break. With Rentrak, you have many more breaks available, which actually can also be combined with little things like geography or ethnic or education. Very exciting stuff, and for a network like CNBC or other networks like that, maybe they want to suggest that type of currency is more important than, a gender age demographic. Very exciting. So anyway, the shorter answer is I do think impressions are the connective tissue. The value of it can be negotiated. Again, that wouldn't be Donovan's role. We just have to enable that to happen. Then what happens next? Once you have some models that start to work, then you can start to talk about targeting.
So as a researcher, I'm wondering, are we talking average delivery, gross delivery, and what parameter? Hourly, daily, program?
Okay, so the first challenge is that let's just let me talk about spot, and let's say that one of the on-demand providers wants to sell by geography, by market geography, and they need to therefore fit into the spot broadcast workflow, business workflow. That's what they have to fit into. So we look at a spot in broadcast, and we realize when you look at it kind of from a data point of view, remember I talked about all those attributes when we defined the byline in the mid-'80s, and then attached to that spot is an attribute called demographic data. So I want to try and reach women 18 to 49, and a third-party database that both the buyer and seller have agreed provides that piece of information. That's the Nielsen database. We, buyers and sellers estimate what that's going to be, but then Nielsen eventually tells us what that is after the fact. That's measured, meaning they have samples, they have they have meters, depending on the marketplace. And I contrast that with counted. So when you ask me about average and et cetera, what the buyer and seller are going to have to agree is how broad and deep is the container that the counting will go into. I'm sure that I'm being a little bit vague here, slightly on purpose, just because this is what we think, and our premise out there doesn't mean this is what everyone is going to immediately adopt. But you define the container from a time and programming point of view. So time is the horizontal axis, and how many programs or even networks are in that capsule, that's your vertical. If it's online on demand, then you actually have a complete count. It's not an average of any kind. The agreement was the definition of the capsule size, the container size. If it's video on demand, then we have to have a agreed upon third-party